Hey everyone, Nubkeks here. So I noticed on YouTube that Preach is churning out the videos about choosing a main. So I said, hey, you know what? I'm gonna jump on that bandwagon. That's what we're gonna do in today's video. I'm gonna be discussing which classes I like and which ones I would like to main. In order to do this, then I'm gonna rank the classes in order of which I find the most fun, starting for the personally least fun for me, up to what I personally enjoy the most and am most likely to play. Again, this is a very subjective list. I'm not trying to be fair here. I'm just kind of, give you my insight. This is how I feel, right? And I think that could be a fun video for you guys as well. I might do a more objective guide in terms of how to guide you guys to choose your own mains. And then, of course, we have upcoming on the channel. Do subscribe. All the class ranking videos, like the proper ones where I try to be fair and give a decent overview from the perspective of all players. Now, before we dive into the specific rankings, I want to introduce you to the sponsor of today's video. And if you like raiding in Shadowlands, I think you might also like Raid Shadow Legends. They're the sponsor for today's video, and Raid is an epic, dark fantasy role-playing game. And you can find links in the description below to download the game for PC or for mobile. I had a tough time choosing a favorite champion to show you here today because there's 16 different factions with literally dozens of heroes in each one. My first thought was to show you Galek. He's a surprisingly handsome orc, and he was my starter champion out of 4. But after some consideration, I've actually swapped my choice to the Sniper from the Dark Elves faction. Although she only starts off as an uncommon 2-star hero compared to Galek being a 3-star hero, she's actually been so powerful for me that I've leveled her up to a 3-star hero as well. The best thing about the Sniper is that she has insane single target damage. She shoots twice at once, and every single time she crits, she reduces the time to her next attack. There's also a lot of new content coming to Raid Shadow Legends this month. They're going to be rebalancing over 20 different champions with a particular focus on the PvP arena battle mode. They're also introducing a new feature called the Forge, where you're going to be able to specifically target and craft weapon and armor sets. And for even more good news, the links I have in the video description to download the game are special referral links. You're going to get a free 100,000 silver, 50 gems, 10 mystery shards to summon in a bunch of champions to get you started, and even one free Lizardman champion called Slasher, who has the right idea and has some extra teeth on his face outside of his real teeth. If you follow the link, you'll find your rewards in-game in your inbox up here. So there you go, guys. Make sure to check out the links in the description below and grab that free stuff to give you a good start. And without any further ado, let's dive back into today's video. All right, we're starting here at the bottom of the pack, position number 12. And really, these bottom 3 positions are not only classes I'm not going to main, but these are 3 classes that I very much doubt I'll play at all for the first half of the expansion at the very, very least. In last place, then, it's the Warrior. Very simply, been there, done that. Been there, done that. I played Warrior at the end of Legion for Antorus, and it was fine. It was enjoyable enough. It's okay. But the class fantasy really doesn't do anything for me. I find them very boring, very plain, very vanilla. And yeah, 1 tier was more than enough. I have absolutely no interest in playing this class at all. It's let other people play it. It's not for me. In second last place, it's the Hunter. This is very similar to the Warrior in the sense that it's a been there, done that scenario. I mained Hunter at the start of BFA. I mained it for the start of Uldir. And then I sort of switched off of it towards the end of Uldir. We were like halfway through Mythic and we were struggling with healers. So I switched to Monk actually at the time. Mistweaver Monk was quite strong. So I could be a spec that could fill in as a healer. And yeah, like I just have no urge to go back to the Hunter. Beast Mastery Hunter looks almost identical to BFA. And I played it so recently and got kind of bored of it that there's just no reason for me to go back. Marksmanship Hunter does look quite improved. But when I consider that I'm not all that interested in playing BM, I have 0 interest in survival. Marksmanship alone, definitely not enough for me to want to invest any much time into the class over other classes. So yeah, Hunter, sorry, but it's not for me. And then the final class that's in this very bottom tier of classes for me might be a surprise to some people, but it's the Death Knight. Yeah, I'm actually going to put the Death Knight down here. And the thing is with the Death Knight, I actually do like all 3 specs, and I appreciate the idea of all 3 specs. But there's one massive problem that does go through all 3 for me personally, which is that I feel like each of the Death Knight specs requires quite a lot of work to make it fit in to the fight. So with the Frost Death Knight, Breath of Syndragosa, right? You got to maintain your Breath of Syndragosa and you want to get that breath up for as long as possible. What does that mean? That means that when you're going into a dungeon or you're going into a raid boss, you know, you're not asking, how can I play this fight the best? You know, what's the best way for me to play this raid boss? You're going, oh god, what abilities does this raid boss have? What abilities does this dungeon have that's going to get in the way of me doing Breath of Sindragosa? It's the same thing I feel with Unholy DK and all of their cooldowns and all of their ramp up. And Blood DK as well. You know, you really have to... I find it the most stressful tank to play. That sort of self-healing style, I love the theme of it, but I just feel like it draws a bit more of my attention compared to the preventative damage tanks. And yeah, that stuff, that's not for me, personally. I can really appreciate that someone might actually value this as the highest tier spec. This might, or the highest tier class. This might be exactly what some people want. But for me, I raid lead. I really don't want to have to invest that much attention into making my spec work. I want specs, I want classes that are going to work relatively reasonably without like over focus, that I can focus more on my team, my raid team, I can focus more on the fight, and I don't have to be hyper focusing on the spec and the spec clashing with the fights. And I think all of the Death Knight specs kind of do that. Going up into 9th place then, and these next 3 classes, actually they're kind of interchangeable for me. And these are all the classes that I'm not planning to main, but these 3 classes could be ones that I might pick up and play at some time as an alt. It's very, very possible that that could happen at some stage during the expansion, so I do feel there's quite a difference in this ranking for these 3 compared to the first 3 that we looked at, which I'm not going to touch. In 9th place, I have the Monk. It's kind of a weird one because Brewmaster is probably my absolute #1 favorite tank spec. It's probably my favorite tank spec, but it's the other 2 specs that don't really do it for me. Mistweaver is my least favorite healing spec. It gets the job done. It's effective, but I just find it very simplistic and very boring. I played this at the end of Uldir after I ditched my Hunter. I sort of benched my Hunter, and I started switching over to being able to heal. I played the Mistweaver for a while, and even by the end of Uldir, I was switching over to Priest at the time, and then I ended up playing Healer Priest and Shadow Priest for the middle part of the expansion, which worked great because Shadow Priest was extremely strong in Eternal Palace in particular. But yeah, the Mistweaver Monk doesn't do it for me. And Windwalker, there's always the concern that they're going to be just a bit shit, right? That's the concern with Windwalker. There's no dancing around it. There's no denying it. That's a big worry. So that's why I've put Monk sort of towards the end here. I might play the class at some stage. I think that could happen. If I really, really wanted to tank and I really wanted to play Brewmaster, I could definitely I could see myself picking this up as an alt at some point and sort of dabbling in the other specs for a little bit of fun. That could totally happen. But it's definitely not going to be a main for me. In 8th place is the Paladin. This is very, very similar to the Monk. You've got a tank, a melee DPS, and a heal spec. Unlike the Monk, though, with the Paladin, I actually really like all of the specs. I enjoy the gameplay of all of them. Unlike the Brewmaster, though, whereas I love the Brewmaster, I simply like all of the Paladin specs. I don't love any of them. So it's kind of a tough choice. Like, I feel like depending on my mood, this could really change the rankings around here. The one big thing, the one big problem that, again, all of the Paladin specs have is mobility. They are so goddamn slow, and that feels really bad. I really don't like that. I actually had a Paladin, mostly Holy Paladin, was one of my alts here in patch 8.3 at the end of BFA, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the playstyle for the most part. But my god, it feels so bad in Mythic Plus when you're just walking after your team and they're just going ahead. They've started pulling the next mob pack and you're like, guys, I'll be with you soon. 30-second cooldown on my charger. I'll see you soon. It's depressing. So that really puts me off ever maining this spec. I just can't handle not having mobility. It's a bummer. I feel like even if they had just one more mobility thing, that could totally change the ranking. It really is that simple. I generally speaking, like nearly everything else about the class, but it's just too big of a downside, too big of a drawback. And then finally, in the 7th spot, I have Shaman. Yeah, this is an intriguing one, actually. This is an intriguing one. So Enhancement Shaman, I think, is wonderful. I really like Enhancement Shaman, and I could totally see myself picking this up as an alt at some point just to have fun, to dabble with, and just to run around crash lightning on everything. And yeah, I think this is badass. It's a fun alt feeling spec to me. Resto Shaman, same thing. I really like Resto Shaman in the raid. I love their utility. I love their stack healing playstyle. I do have to say, though, Resto Shaman, it does feel like a pain in the butt to play it in dungeons. It's really doesn't feel like a spec that's designed for that, and that puts me off. Elemental Shaman, they're not getting anything much new in Shadowlands. It's a bit depressing on that front. However, I also didn't play Elemental Shaman in BFA, so it technically is still new to me in that sense. So yeah, I could potentially see myself dabbling in some Shaman, you know, playing some Resto in the raids, running around in dungeons, having fun as an enhancement Shaman, and then maybe even busting out some Elemental for some fun there. I could see myself reasonably dabbling in each of these specs, so I think this is a good pick for a more casual alt at some point during the expansion. And with that, guys, we're into the top half of the list. That's 6 classes out of the way. There's still 6 to go, though. We got to narrow this down even more. At this point, it is worth noting, okay, when I'm really trying to make this decision, for me, the things that are important, the most important thing for me is Mythic raiding. That's what I'm mostly into. I raid lead a cutting edge Mythic guild. So it matters that the spec I'm going to pick is going to fit with the raid team, and that it's also going to be viable for Mythic raiding. And right now, with the raid team that we have, I'm definitely, you know, range DPS, of course. There's no question, you know, melee DPS just doesn't fit very well into a Mythic raiding roster. In fact, we already have too many people interested in melee, so that mostly counts those out, right? It mostly counts those out. So I'm looking more towards range DPS, and it also matters to me that I'm going to be able to multi-role, so either fill in as a tank or fill in as a healer. Being able to have some flexibility is very valuable, because again, that's just a really valuable thing to bring to any raid team. If you're able to play multiple specs, multiple roles, a lot of people aren't interested in that. A lot of people can't do that. So that is really a great thing that you can bring. I also like doing Mythic Plus dungeons a lot, so I want to be good, have some classes or specs that are good for Mythic Plus. And I like to dabble in PvP. You know, I like to do a lot of stuff. You know, my main is going to be the thing I'm going to play in every form of content. So I want it to be good. And yeah, as we're going into these top 6 classes, obviously we're talking about a main. I'm not going to have just one class either. You know, I'm going to have a main class, but I'm likely also to have a main alt. You know, I think having two classes reasonably ready to go is reasonable for the start of the expansion. That makes sense. I had 2 classes ready to go for most of BFA. Most of BFA is that's what I had. So yeah, without any further ado though, you know what? That's enough of that. Let's just dive in. Let's actually talk about these classes. In 6th place then is the Rogue. And yeah, I know you guys are going, hey, wait. In this that little intro segment right there, you just said you really want to play a range spec and you can't really play melee, and Rogue is 3 melee specs in 1. And yeah, that's why it's in 6th place. Now, the reason why it's in 6th place and not lower is because I really like this. I really, really like Sub. I mained Sub actually in WoD, in Blackrock Foundry. I had an absolute blast. It was one of the most fun times I had raiding, and wow. The spec was just so enjoyable, and Sub is going back to that sort of playstyle in quite a large way. I just adore this spec in melee. It's so much fun. And like that one spec alone is basically enough to elevate this class this high in the tier list. It really is. And it's a joy to play not only in Raid, but it's a joy to play in Mythic Plus. It's a joy to play in PvP. So it's a really good one. At the same time, really don't like Outlaw. No thank you. Roll the bones, go away. Roll the hell out of here. And Assassination's fine. I actually quite like Assassination. So I got 2 specs there I quite enjoy. But yeah, I just can't feasibly rank this higher though, because you're purely a melee DPS, and that's such a niche thing that yeah, that's too niche for me, I think. But I'm gonna include it here in this bottom half of the final section, just as a spec that could easily end up being like a main alt kind of thing, you know, like if I'm gonna be I could have this as a main alt and bust it out in raids occasionally, or mostly for Mythic Plus or PvP. Can I have this? Can I have the Sub Rogue? I don't know, maybe. Anyway, it's a maybe. Next up in 5th place is the Demon Hunter, and this is very much, again, it's not going to be my main, but this very possibly could be my main alt. The main alt that I'm going to run. It was my main alt for most of BFA, right? And I feel like out of all of the classes, Demon Hunter is a really good class to have as an alt. Especially if you're playing a class that's not great at solo content, that kind of struggles. And kind of grinding stuff out, your dailies and stuff, is a little bit of a hassle. it kind of feels bad then if you're going to go back in and you're going to have to grind out those things again on a second character. If that second character is also bad at world content, that's just depressing. But with a Demon Hunter, they're pretty much the best. They're pretty much the best. So it actually makes the regrinding, it makes the alt process much more enjoyable, actually, because it's so fast, it's so snappy, and it's so damn good at it that, yeah, it actually feels really good. But yeah, with Demon Hunter, you've got melee with Havoc, you've got Vengeance to tank. I really like both things. Let's talk about Vengeance first. I filled in a bit this tier. Havoc Demon Hunters was my main this tier. I think I forgot to say that, but for Nyalotha, that was my main. I switched onto my Demon Hunter as my main, off my Priest, because Priest just, we didn't need the healer. And Shadow just wasn't a great damage dealer for the start of Nyalotha, for progress in Nyalotha. It wasn't great. Havoc was better. So yeah, Vengeance, I played some Vengeance. I did some raid bosses tanking, filling in when we needed someone to fill in. And it's enjoyable enough, actually. I like Vengeance. The most fun thing about Vengeance is definitely the sigils. I love the utility, you know, AoE Silence, AoE Fear, AoE Grip, even AoE Damage, I guess, is okay. But yeah, it's just a fun little spec. It's an enjoyable tank. And I think it's quite cool leaping around and turning into a big tanky demon. I like that. Havoc, the appeal for Havoc, it's the opposite of the Death Knight for me. I criticize the Death Knight as being a spec that gets in your way, right? You're kind of going, how do I play this raid boss the best? And you know, the Death Knight turns around and goes, what about my Breath of Cinder Ghost? No, I'm not doing that. I want to breathe, damn it. It just gets in the way. Demon Hunter's the opposite. Demon Hunter's the opposite. You go, okay, what's the best way to play this raid fight? How do I handle this mechanic the best? And then your friendly neighborhood Havoc spec comes over. It's like, hey, buddy, do you want a Fell Rush for that? You want a Nether Walk for that? I can do it. I can do anything. I'm super good. I've got burst damage. I've got sustain. I'll do anything. Don't worry, pal. And it's super easy. You don't even need to think about it. It's just going to happen. I got you. That's the Havoc Demon Hunter. It's very simple. But it's so fast, it's so snappy, and it was just so, in BFA in particular, it was so good at everything. Now, it is being nerfed in survivability massively in Shadowlands, but I think it's still going to be a nice spec, and definitely for raid leading, it was great. It was a great spec to raid lead off of, because you just don't really need to think about it, and that's an attractive thing. You can really focus on the fights, and the spec doesn't get in the way. It just helps you do the fights. So yeah, I actually rate the class quite highly, and that's why it's in 5th. In 4th place, this is a difficult decision. In 4th place, I'm putting the Mage. Arcane Mage was a really impressive spec for me on the beta. I really liked it. I think this is a simple change of adding Touch of the Magi, totally reinvented how the Arcane Mage plays. It now makes sense to me, and it's really, really fun. I love it. I think it's so good. Frost Mage is less interesting to me, but it's still fun enough. It's a fun spec to play sometimes. And I think that definitely the Mage stands out to me as going, okay, I can main Arcane on most of the raid fights, but when there is stacked cleave, or, you know, when I go into dungeons, I can bust out that Frost Mage sometimes and have a really good time on that and be successful on that. And then I can play whichever spec is going to be better in PvP, and I'm going to have a great time in PvP as well. And I can be very successful in all the different types of content as a versatile and flexible damage dealer. And I'm not going to play fire, because fire is horrible. Fire sucks in Shadowlands. I'm sorry, but it does. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking at with the Mage. What's the downside? Well, it's more of a practicality thing, which is that for my guild, for my raid team, we got lots of people that want to play Mage. It's one of the more popular specs, more popular classes, I should say. We've got quite a few people interested in Mage. Obviously, it's not too much of a surprise. You got lots of people playing Mage in Nyalotha, right? Because Fire Mage was the best DPS spec in the raid. So yeah, that's kind of issue there. Is if I play Mage, we really don't need me to play another Mage. It's much more valuable for me. It's much better contribution for me to the raid team to play a spec that we are lacking in. So that's why Mage has to come down into the sort of the main alt section alongside the Demon Hunter and Rogue, of a spec that I really would love to play, but I don't think quite fits the needs of the team. And that brings us to the top 3. These are the big boys. These are the ones that are really tussling it out, really duking it out to claim the spot for me as my main. In 3rd place, I'm going to put the Druid. I'm putting the Druid in 3rd place. Resto Druid in particular is a spec that I have wanted to play basically forever. forever. It always looks so cool. I love the idea of heal over time. I love the theme of their class. They look fantastic. However, I never sat down and actually played it because I just didn't like the other Druid specs. Don't like the whole shape-shifting thing. It just didn't tickle my pickle, if you catch my drift. Well, it wasn't for me. In Shadowlands, though, Balanced Druid is actually really fun. I really like the Balanced Druid in Shadowlands. I think it's good. I think I tried to level a Balanced Druid because I wanted to play Resto in BFA, like for the end, like in Nilotha, once we'd done with progress, and it's just kind of messing around. I tried to play Druid, and Balance was so boring that I left it. I didn't even finish leveling it. I hated it. And I leveled the Paladin. I played Paladin instead. But yeah, Balance, I like it in Shadowlands. And with that, suddenly the Druid becomes a really appealing class because Resto, I think it's fantastic. And I'd love to play it in PvP and Mythic Plus, obviously. And cool, a nice little spec to bring as a backup healer for the raid. And then maining Balance, you know, a fun range damage spec that is much improved in Shadowlands, I think, and brings an absolute ton of utility, which I think is really exciting. Feral Druid, wouldn't touch it. Sorry, Feral Druid fans, wouldn't touch it. And Guardian Druid, though, I actually really like. And Guardian Druid is a very simple tank. It's a very straightforward tank. And that, to me, again, is very appealing. As someone that just very much dabbles in tank, I think it's just a really nice spec to have. Like, when your guilds, you know, you're trying to organize Mythic Plus runs, and, like, your tank is on their alt or whatever. You don't have a tank, which is often the thing that happens. You know, tanks are hard to come by. Pugging, tanks are hard to come by. Being able to just go, hey, I could totally fill in as bear for this dungeon, no problem. I think that's an awesome thing to do. That's really cool. Or fill in the raid as the bear as well. I think that's great. And even if you don't play the spec all that much, I think you'd still be able to pick it up and be fairly successful with it. So yeah, that's the appeal for me of Druid. The downside for Druid, the reason it's in number 3, is the same thing as the Mage. It's the same thing as the Mage, which is that I don't know if I stabbed myself in the foot a bit by being so positive towards Druid in the videos I did. I don't know if some of my guildies saw it. But yeah, a lot of people in the guild now want to play Druid. It's another really popular class in Shadowlands. So yeah, once again, it's just the needs of the raid team, the need of the guild. I think another Druid, it's just we don't need another Druid. Another Druid would be a Druid too many. So that's the reason I have to leave it as number 3. It could very, very possibly be a spec that I do pick up at some point, or it could easily be my main alt, just because it has that flexibility in the roles that it provides. And yeah, I like it. I like it. But yeah, damn you, raid team, taking my Druid. In second place, then, we have the Warlock. Warlock's in second. Warlock does one thing only, but it does that one thing really well, and that's range damage. That's range damage. And if you guys know anything about DPS in Mythic raiding, it's that the range DPS is king. And if you've ever had a leadership position in Mythic raiding, you'll know that you get a lot of applications from melee DPS, and you have to keep turning them down because there's too many goddamn melee DPS, and it's more popular. Ranged is what you're really hoping to get. So being able to fulfill that on the Warlock, it's got to be the top pick, you know, for a ranged DPS. I guess competing with the Mage. With the Warlock, you got the 3 DPS specs. They all have the potential to be really good on particular fights. Maybe not as much Demonology, but Demonology I've actually found really fun. Probably the most fun, actually, Warlock spec that I played was Demonology. I really liked it. But yeah, that's the appeal for Warlock for me. The big appeal is that you're going, okay, in the raid, this is like a top tier damage. It's absolute top tier damage. It's also looking really good in dungeons right now. Like Destro is currently doing crazy damage on the beta. Now I do expect that to be nerfed and toned down. But Destro with the fire build is actually very fun to play in the dungeon. I'm not a big fan of the traditional Destro build. That's the big concern, I guess, for me with Warlock. If the traditional sort of slow Destro build, all about the Infernal and Chaos builds, if that's the thing, I don't enjoy it that much. Something that Arcane Mage does well is that their Touch of the Magi, as like their sort of medium length cooldown, is very satisfying to play around. Whereas Havoc, for me, with the Destruction Warlock, isn't. That's a downside. But I do like the Fire Destruction build, which is all about just throwing loads of Incinerates and Conflags and debuffing them with Roaring Blaze and throwing Rain of Fires. That's really cool in the dungeon. I like that a lot. So if that's good, that's a big attraction. And Affliction, I think, is great. Lots of variety with the talent builds, loads of different talent builds. Affliction with its rework is looking really strong, looks good in dungeons, looks great in the raid. So this is definitely one that has potential. I think we only have one main warlock right now. We've got one trial warlock, so we're low on warlocks, and I could definitely see myself going into this as the main. If that's what the raid team needs, it's highly likely that it's going to be a top tier DPS, so this one has good potential. It's not number one though, because number one I'm giving to the priest. This is maybe a boring choice because priest is my main for most of BFA. Oh man, I feel like I'm a very boring person just going with the same exact class again. But in my defense, Shadow Priest did get reworked, and the rework for Shadow is really, really good. Especially as they've updated it and smoothed it out. I mean, it still has a slight issue that Devouring Plague and single target, you can overcap on Insanity. It gets a bit clunky. But apart from that, the spec is wonderful. You know, it's got a wonderful talent tree. The core flow, the core rotation of the new Shadow Priest is fantastic. It's a joy to play. It's really, really good. Yeah, it's got great legendaries now as well. They just reworked a couple of them, and they're great. So the Shadow Priest, I think, is everything going for it from a fun perspective. It's just, I love the spec. Obviously, I love the theme of the class, and I'd be happy to main it again. The only concern, I guess, with the Shadow Priest is, you know, how viable will it be, especially considering it's competing with Warlock as my number 2. You know, it's quite possible that Shadow Priest will just do a bit less damage than one of the Warlock specs, and in that sense, they're going to be a little bit undervalued. But at the same time, there is nobody else in the guild that wants to play Shadow Priest, so that massive plus. That very much pushes me towards it, because it'd be good to have one in case they are very, very strong. Yeah, I think even if it's, you know, it doesn't need to be top tier. I don't need to play the best spec, right? So long as the spec is good, so long as it's viable, I'm totally happy to play it as a ranged DPS. And I think that Shadow Priest definitely will be that. I'd be shocked if it wasn't that, honestly. On top of that, though, the big appeal for me with the Priest, because Shadow, that's just one spec. That's not enough to make a class. That's not enough to make a main. I love the other 2 specs on Priest as well. Holy and Disc. I love them both. This might actually surprise people, but in the raid, I'd actually play Holy Priest. I'd actually play Holy Priest. Why? Well, 2 reasons. Number 1, we already have a couple of people interested in Disc, so our Disc Priest, that's covered. That's covered in the healing comp. No problem. So I don't need to worry about that. Number 2, obviously, we did have to worry about that in the past, right? For some of BFA, we didn't have a Disc Priest, and I actually had to fill in on Disc Priest for some fights. And what I found as the raid leader, it's a struggle. It's a real struggle to play Disc and to raid lead at the same time, right? Because Disc is maybe a bit overhyped in terms of how hard the spec actually is, but the one thing about Disc is that, you know, coming up to a big damage moment, you got to do your ramp up right. So you do have to concentrate on the spec. You have to be concentrating on those timers for yourself, and you have to have planned out, you know, when you're going to ramp up. You're going to ramp up at that time, and then you're going to be blasting the healing. And here's the thing, right? When are you ramping up? You're ramping up when there's going to be something big and dangerous happening, and you're going to be focusing on your ramp up. Well, that sort of clashes a bit with the raid leader, because if the raid leader is concentrating on playing their damn spec for the 10 seconds coming up to a big damage moment, they're not going to do a very good job raid leading. And that's what I found. I found that it was very difficult to actually be, you know, do a decent job raid leading and do a decent job at Disc at the same time. That just wasn't something that really merged together very well. So I'm actually much more likely to play Holy in the raid, and I think that actually fits even better probably as the sort of, you know, the 5th healer, right? As a backup healer, it's cool. It's easy to just slot in and do lots of healing. But more importantly, you know, if there are fights that need 5 healers, which does happen, you know, every tier, you know, there often is a fight on progress, early progress, where that 5th healer can be kind of necessary and can come in. I think Holy Priest fits that role super well, right? Because why are you bringing in the 5th healer? You're bringing in a 5th healer on a mythic fight because there's just a crazy amount of damage, and you just need a lot of healing throughput to deal with it. And the damage check isn't that bad. Holy Priest is perfect for that. What does the Holy Priest do? They do a lot of healing. They do a lot of throughput. That's their thing. That's their jam. So I actually think it makes a whole lot of sense. And yeah, I love playing Holy Priest, actually. I find it really enjoyable. It's a really enjoyable spec. I love playing Disc as well. I like playing both of them in dungeons. I like playing Disc more in PvP. But yeah, again, I'm looking at this as a main. I'm going to play this in Mythic raiding, in Mythic plus dungeons, trying to be semi, you know, pushing semi-competitive. And I like dabbling in PvP as well. Obviously, I'm going to dabble in PvP at the start of the expansion. And I'm happy to play basically all of the specs and all of that type of content. So yeah, that's why Priest is going to be, it's my number 1 spec. I think it looks really good. It fits the raid team. I enjoy all of it and all the content. So 90% sure it's going to be priest. Again, the only thing that could pull it away, I guess, you know, if we somehow magically get a bunch of people that are suddenly magically really interested in off healing, like filling in as healers, then I wouldn't be as tied to the you know, being a spec that can heal and do damage. But I think it's what makes the most sense right now, and I don't expect major changes. And then the other possibility, like if Shadow ends up being terrible in the raid, like if they're bottom tier DPS, then it could easily end up in a situation where I just have to like main Warlock or something like that, and just gear up an alt to heal instead. It's handier if you can just have the one class do both. That's handy. But if that's not possible, then that might be something I have to do. Like I said, I don't expect it to be bottom tier, but you never know with tuning. It's possible that they could be nerfed into the ground and be terrible. It's possible. You have to be ready for anything, right? So yeah, that's how it's looking for me. Like I said, I'm not sure what my main alt is going to be. There's still time to change and make up my mind. But for right now, Priest is number 1. I'm quite likely to bust out a Druid at some point. I just think that Resto looks so fun, especially in Mythic Plus. I think that's going to be great. Warlock, definitely up there. And then I've got a few other specs, you know, the Mage, the Demon Hunter, the Rogue. They could easily be main alts. And yeah, I think it's quite likely at some point in the expansion, the Shaman, the Paladin, or the Monk are going to come out, but not at the start. You know, you got to make decisions. You got to focus up at the start of the expansion and get your couple of characters geared so you can do the content you want. And that's kind of my approach to it. Guys, let me know what you think. And like I said, I'll probably do more of a guide type video. This was kind of my personal take, and it's supposed to be very personal. It's supposed to give you insight into my decision-making process and how I look at the classes, if you're interested in that. But I might do more of like an objective sort of guide thing to help you guys make your decisions and focus on what's important. So we'll see. Anyway, there you go. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.